Now, Fatima, it's an absolute honor to have you speaking here tonight, and we look forward to hearing from you. Now, like many in the audience, I suspect Fatima Bhutto needs little introduction. Belonging to one of the world's most famous political dynasties, her book is a revelatory portrait of a family which has shaped modern-day Pakistan. Beyond the insightful commentary on Pakistan's rambunctious political scene, her book also details the tragic narratives of her grandfather's death, Dhulfaqar Ali Bhutto, her father's death, Murtaza Ali Bhutto, and also most recently the assassination of her aunt, Benazir Bhutto, also a former Prime Minister of Pakistan. A poet and writer, Fatima graduated summa cum laude from Columbia University before pursuing further studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. Since returning to Karachi, she has contributed regularly to the local and foreign press. Importantly, she has been a vociferous critic of corruption in Pakistani society. Most recently, she has highlighted the ineptitude of the Pakistani government in dealing with the catastrophic floods in Pakistan last month. On a personal note, Fatima doesn't like running but loves Lebanese sweets. So tonight's event will consist of a short talk followed by a question and answer session. At 6:30 p.m. there'll be a book signing at the Harvard Co-op Bookshop on Massachusetts Avenue. Can you please help me in enthusiastically welcoming Fatima Bhutto?
Thank you to all of you for coming and for all the wonderful sponsors. Strangely, there are people in the audience here who I knew from Syria growing up, from SOAS at university, randomly, so I might grin maniacally at you. It's not personal. It's just because I'm excited and confused at the same time. I thought I would start just by talking about dynasty. Everywhere I go, it seems that people connect dynasty instantly with Pakistan when it is a blight on South Asia, really. You have dynasty in India, in Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, Nepal. And what you have also is a history not only of dynasty, but of violent assassinations, assassinations of public figures in all these countries. Again, whether you're looking at the Gandhis, you're looking at the Bandaranaikes in Sri Lanka. And one particular case that I think highlights really how these two are interconnected is the case of Mujibur Rahman, the founder of Bangladesh. When Mujibur Rahman was killed, along with him, his wife was assassinated, his two elder sons were assassinated, their two wives were assassinated, and his 9-year-old boy, his 9-year-old son, along with the rest of the family. The people who led Mujib's killing remained in power for some 30 years. It's only very recently that they were brought to justice and held accountable for their actions. And one of the men, a soldier, a senior member of the army, was asked once why it was necessary that they had to kill the 9-year-old boy. And he answered, he said, well, we couldn't let him live. We had to kill him because they were building a dynasty. But it's not just dynasties that share this experience of violence. It's also millions of citizens in all these countries face assassinations on a daily basis that get no notice in any of the foreign press or even in the local press. Journalists being killed in Sri Lanka. Those of you following Pakistan will know that just last month Habib Jalib, who was a lawyer, a secular activist in Balochistan, was gunned down outside his home, and there are no answers. There is no pause because violence has become a part of our political ethic. And I thought what I would do is, do you guys mind readings or do you not want readings? Sure. Depends, okay. That'll be fine, okay. Readings. Sometimes you read and everyone just sort of looks at you and goes to sleep. But the family story really starts with my grandfather, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and he comes to power at a time when there is an extraordinary imagination for Pakistan. It's under his government that the last comprehensive land reforms are carried out, though not completed. The first and only constitution is written in 1973, and it's a constitution that remains in tatters. You have Pakistan moving away from being a client state to a country that is now seeking bilateral foreign relations. you have Pakistan hosting the second ever Islamic conference in Lahore, and the citizens of Lahore are asked to open up their homes to the delegates that are coming from all over the world. And one of the fun facts that I always like to talk about is the fact that they had to open their homes because Idi Amin of Uganda came uninvited and with a very large entourage. But Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made mistakes. We have a tendency to lionize public figures, I suppose, all over the world, but nowhere is that more true than Pakistan. And he expanded his powers at the cost of the constitution. Like all other leaders before him and all others after him, used force in the gas-rich province of Balochistan. And he isolated himself from his power base. He promoted the man who would kill him over the heads of more deserving generals because he felt he would be a pliant figure. And in 1977 he was overthrown in a coup d'etat and put to death 2 years later. And I thought I would read you just two small sections. The first is a letter that he wrote from his death cell. And the second is on Rawalpindi. So this is part of a book that was printed, a legal rejoinder that was printed called If I Am Assassinated. And in it, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto writes, I have been hemmed in by its sordidness and stink throughout the heat and rain of the long, hot summer. The light is poor and my eyesight has worsened. My health has been shattered and I've been in solitary confinement for almost a year. But my morale is high because I am not made of the wood which burns easily. Through sheer willpower and conditions that are adverse in the extreme, I have written this rejoinder. Let all the white papers come. I do not have to defend myself at the bar of public opinion. Ordinarily, I would not have bothered to reply to the tissue of lies contained in this disgusting document. And this is a document that alleged he was responsible for murder, that he was a bad Muslim, anything really that they could put in there. But the circumstances are not ordinary. A principle is involved, the principle of the right of reply. And as I have said at the trial in Lahore, forget the fact that I have been the President and Prime Minister of Pakistan. Forget the fact that I am the leader of the premier party of this country. Forget all those things. But I am a citizen of this country and I am facing a murder trial. And even the ordinary citizen, and I consider myself one, is not denied justice. Rawalpindi, situated in the Potwar Plateau, is a short distance from Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. It is and has always been a garrison city. Home to the Raj's British forces and since independence, the Pakistani army, Rawalpindi sits higher up than the land surrounding it, instantly cooler and breezier. But it has a sinister reputation, at least amongst politicians. It was once the home of the exiled 19th century Afghan king, Shuja Shah. It is where the man Muhammad Ali Jinnah had appointed as Pakistan's first prime minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, was assassinated. And it is where the army had taken Zulfikar Ali Bhutto to die. Almost 30 years after his murder, his eldest child, Benazir, would also lose her life in Rawalpindi. Rawalpindi jail, however, has long since been destroyed. Zia razed it to the ground in the 1980s, wary of its potential to become a Bhuttoist symbol. Only one of the prison's original walls remains now, old red bricks covered with a deep green ivy. The rest of Rawalpindi jail has been turned into a shopping mall. Situated between the old Prime Minister's residence and various military offices, the jail has now been renamed Jinnah Park, and it is home to a McDonald's, a Cinepax cinema, and a Papa Sal's pizza joint franchised over from Islamabad. At the entrance of what was once Rawalpindi jail is a 2-story yellow building. The top story is covered by a sign that reads Blacks, next to a large photograph of a woman's eyes. Maybe it is a beauty parlor, but I don't know. The bottom half of the building just reads Tequila City, and it's anyone's guess what goes on there in alcohol-free Pakistan. It is here that the army killed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and then erased all traces of his blood. The coup that followed and the ensuing years, the 11 years of martial law in Pakistan, brutalized the country in a way that we've never since recovered from. You had amazing censorship initiatives. So every city in Pakistan had a censor board. And that censor board was dealt with in the morning for the morning papers and in the evening for the evening papers. And the Pakistani media is a phenomenal creature. It has moments of great temerity, and this was really its shining moment. So the journalists subverted the censor board by printing papers in the Lahore edition of the newspaper that the Karachi board had refused to let go to print. When that didn't work, when the censor board, which they did very often, just crossed out entire articles, not editing them, but simply cancelling them out, newspapers, broadsheets went to print with blank spaces in them. So you would open up a broadsheet and there would be one box of news, maybe on the left-hand side and maybe one on the right, and that was it, just white boxes. And the junta didn't think this was amusing, so they declared that all newspapers had to print content. You couldn't leave empty spaces. So when things were blocked out, newspapers ran pictures of donkeys or pictures of dogs. And journalists paid. It's the one time in our history we have had, and I'm sure some of you are following what's been happening in Pakistan recently with the case of a journalist who was picked up quite recently. The New York Times ran. So, I mean, in the 1980s, you had journalists flogged in public in Lahore. This, to me, seems like a brutal reminder of those days. You also had Islamicization to the extreme. So 5 times a day prayers were declared mandatory in all schools and government buildings and offices. The water lines were closed down during Ramadan, including the sewage lines, which shows you what Zia thought of non-fasters. And you have the blasphemy laws instituted, which sounds like what it is, which means anyone who looks even sideways at the Quran can be put to death. And then you have the hudud ordinances, which are the most violent laws ever in the country against women. And what the hudud say is they declare that anyone who is found guilty of adultery can and should be put to death, and anyone who is found guilty of engaging in premarital intercourse can and should be put to death, effectively criminalizing the victim of rape. And these are all still on the books. The blasphemy law still is a part of Pakistani Penal Code, as is the hudud. And we'll get back to that in a minute. I just want to run through a couple of other things. In 1985, 6 years after Zulfikar's execution, his youngest son, Shahnawaz, is murdered. And Shahnawaz's case has never been solved. Like all the cases in the family's history of assassinations, there's been no justice. There have been no answers, there have been no culprits apprehended. And we see this carry through not just with the Bhutto family, but again with Liaquat Ali Khan's killers, never been brought to trial. Zia-ul-Haq dies in a plane crash. Nobody knows who killed Zia-ul-Haq. A Vanity Fair article said it was like murder on the Orient Express. Everybody had a motive, but who could get away with it is the question. And the answer of who could get away with it, that's a whole other lecture. And it is on the heel of her younger brother's murder that Benazir's political star rises. In 1986, she begins power-sharing negotiations with the military, whereby she accepts the army's right to control the foreign policy of the country, the army's right to appoint cabinet ministers in her government, the IMF dictates that have already been signed, and she comes to power. And a vote really that is rigged. A great amount of hope was placed on Benazir's shoulders, but yet the army controls the numbers. The army takes an obnoxious amount of time to invite her to become prime minister of the country. But still she accepts. And in the 2-year, just about, period of her first government, no legislation is passed. Which is not to say that no meaningful legislation is passed, but just that no legislation is passed. And no legislation, perhaps even more importantly, is removed. So the hudud laws stay. The blasphemy laws remain. And Benazir's first government is overthrown on the grounds of gross corruption and human rights abuses. in 1990. But it's really in her second government that those charges go full throttle. The New York Times estimates that in the second government, between $2 billion to $3 billion are taken by the first couple. Everyone knows that Asif Zardari, then the prime ministerial spouse, is called Mr. 10% in the first government and Mr. 50% in the second, and now he's Mr. 110%. And the human rights abuses continue. And for those of you who know Karachi, you will remember that the early 90s saw Karachi as a city on fire. The police forces and the security agencies were empowered under the aegis of Operation Cleanup to, quote, clean up the city of Karachi. And in the year and a half period that Operation Cleanup is in effect, some 3,000 men are murdered in the city of Karachi. One of those men is my father. He had been elected to the Provincial Assembly. He was a very vocal critic of the corruption of the government. He called the Prime Minister's husband, who at the time was, not only a senator, Minister of Investment, he'd previously been Minister of the Environment. He calls him Asif Baba and the 40 Thieves, or the Chalis Chor. That doesn't endear him. He also speaks out he speaks out on the direction of the party, on the direction of the country. We are a rice-growing country that cannot feed its people. And 14 years ago, just about to the week, he is killed outside of our family home as he returns from a rally on the outskirts of Karachi. 7 people are killed that night, including my father. The roads had been blocked off, the street lights had been shut, and the guards of all the nearby residences, and we live on a road that I always say is shady in a leafy way, but also shady in that you have the British High Commission, you've got the Russians, the Iranians, who everyone loves nowadays, on the same street, and all the guards of these quite high-profile consulates are told to retreat within their embassies.